Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I discuss the films that shaped the MTV generation. One element that consumed American society and shaped the worldview of those of us who were kids or teens during the Reagan years was the relentless pursuit of wealth. And 1983's Risky Business was among the first films, and certainly the first film aimed at a young Gen X audience, to examine that celebration of capitalism. Risky Business was written and directed by Paul Brickman, who has written a handful of films, including 1977's The Bad News Bears and Breaking Training, and 1999's True Crime. The only other full-length feature directed by Brickman is the 1990 family drama Men Don't Leave. His relatively low cinematic output seems a bit surprising, given his success with Risky Business, which was both a box office hit and received favorably by critics. We open with high school student Joel Goodson recounting a recurring anxiety dream about wandering into a neighbor's house and being seduced by a mystery woman taking a shower, only to find himself transported to a high school classroom where the SAT test is already in progress. Joel is played by Tom Cruise in his breakout role. He'd already had significant parts in films like Taps and The Outsiders, but Risky Business transported him into leading man territory, though it would be 3 more years before Top Gun solidified his status as one of the world's most bankable film stars. Joel is playing poker with his best friends. Miles, played by Curtis Armstrong, best known for Revenge of the Nerds and for the ABC romantic comedy Moonlighting. Barry, played by Bronson Pinchot, who would go on to star as Balky Bartokomous in the ABC sitcom Perfect Strangers. Glenn, played by Raphael Sbarge, who was Jiminy Cricket on ABC's Once Upon a Time. And Chuck, played by Kevin Anderson, who starred in the ABC series Nothing Sacred. Everyone at this poker game, with the exception of Tom Cruise, ended up gainfully employed by ABC. As his anxiety dream would indicate, Joel is a mess of neuroses about girls and sex and about his looming adulthood. Joel's parents are going out of town, leaving him in charge of their posh home in the affluent Chicago suburb of Glencoe. Miles counsels Joel to try living it up a little while his parents are away. He gives him a specific piece of advice that quickly became a 1980s catchphrase among Gen X kids and teens. I first saw Risky Business in the mid-80s when it was broadcast on network television, and it's a film with a pretty hard R rating, so it was edited considerably to sanitize it for primetime TV. And thus I went for years assuming Miles tells Joel, sometimes you just gotta say, what the hell? Of course, the word that Miles uses is not hell, but I was in college in the early 90s before I figured that out. We meet Joel's parents, who are not given names outside of Joel's mom and Joel's dad, and who are played respectively by Janet Carroll and Nicholas Pryor. Just from our brief introduction to them, in which Joel's mom pressures him to retake his SATs to boost his scores, and his father stresses the importance of getting into Princeton before chewing him out for messing with the settings on his stereo, we understand why Joel is so neurotic. His parents flip so quickly between warmly supportive and coldly disappointed that in every scene they're in, I can feel my anxiety levels spike. Left alone in the house, Joel immediately fixes himself a giant whiskey and coke to wash down his still-frozen TV dinner, which for a classy touch he eats by candlelight. And then he bops around in his underwear while lip-syncing to Bob Seger's 1979 hit, Old Time Rock and Roll. The scene became iconic with good reason, because it's both very funny and very relatable. The way Joel behaves when he's alone is very different from the way he behaves around his parents or around his friends, and it's cute seeing him acting like a damn fool. Tom Cruise was 21 when he made this film, and he makes a believable teenager. He's good looking, of course, but he's got visible acne and no visible muscle tone, and I think we're also used to decades of Tom Cruise unstoppable action juggernaut that there's something endearing about seeing this unpolished side of him. Over lunch with his friends, the discussion turns to future plans. Everyone is hell-bent on getting into the colleges of their choice so they can be assured of high-paying jobs. Joel, who is a sensitive soul, tentatively suggests that there should be more to life than money, and his friends all laugh merrily at his naivete. Joel and Barry take Joel's dad's Porsche out for a spin, against Joel's dad's express wishes. They indulge in some drag racing and spin donuts in a parking lot. Miles urges Joel to take his rebellious behavior even further by arranging a visit from a sex worker whose services are advertised in the back pages of a newspaper. Joel refuses, but Miles goes ahead and schedules him a visit from a sex worker named Jackie. When Jackie arrives, she turns out to be a trans woman, played by Bruce A. Young. The 80s were not a great decade for on-screen treatment of LGBTQ characters, particularly in teen-geared films, so we're grading on a curve here, but Risky Business handles the subplot with Jackie pretty well. It's obviously meant as a punchline that Jackie is trans, which isn't great, but the script treats her with respect. Joel is initially startled, but he's apologetic and pays her for her time, even though he doesn't avail himself of her services, and Jackie is pretty cool about the whole incident. She gives him the name of a friend of hers, a fellow sex worker named Lana, whom she thinks will be more Joel's type. Alone at home, Joel has another anxiety dream. This time it's about finding himself surrounded by a SWAT team while he's having sex with the babysitter next door. Joel has issues. Anxious and horny, he calls Lana and asks her to come over. She arrives, and she is a goddess, played by Rebecca De Mornay in what was pretty close to her screen debut. De Mornay had a bunch of leading parts after this in films like And God Created Woman and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and she's still working steadily. She had a recurring role on Marvel's Jessica Jones a few years ago, but Risky Business is her most high-profile role. Joel and Lana have great chemistry together, which makes sense because Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay started dating each other during filming, though De Mornay was also involved with Harry Dean Stanton at the same time. She was also engaged at one point to musician Leonard Cohen, which the heart knows what it wants, but if you can come up with any common traits between Tom Cruise, Harry Dean Stanton, and Leonard Cohen, you have a more agile brain than I do. Joel and Lana spend a passionate night together, and then in the morning Joel is stunned to realize he owes her $300. This seems like the kind of detail that should have been negotiated and probably even paid in advance. Joel, who is a trusting soul, leaves Lana alone in his parents' home while he goes to the bank to cash a bond his grandparents gave him. When he returns, he discovers Lana has stolen his mother's prized Steuben glass egg. Acting on a tip from Jackie, Joel and Miles look for Lana in the lobby of a posh hotel. Lana spots Joel but ignores him. As Joel and Miles are getting ready to leave in defeat, Lana climbs into the front seat of the Porsche and urges Joel to floor it. She's being pursued by her gun-toting pimp Guido, played by character actor Joe Pantoliano, aka Joey Pants, whose many roles have included one of the Fratelli brothers in The Goonies and Cypher in The Matrix. Joel takes off, with Guido in hot pursuit. Lana explains that she has severed business ties with Guido, and Guido is taking it poorly. She's willing to return Joel's Steuben egg, but it's in her apartment and Guido has probably changed the locks. Joel distrusts Lana, but her personality is stronger than his, so he reluctantly agrees to let her stay with him while she figures out how to get the egg back. She promptly begins snooping around, checking the Persian rugs for knot density and the silver for its hallmarks. She brings along one of her friends, a sex worker named Vicky, played by Shara Denise. Guido shows up at the house and accuses Joel of trying to horn in on his territory by acting as Lana and Vicky's new pimp. Guido eventually leaves after delivering a flurry of veiled threats. Joe Pantoliano is pretty great in this role, infusing Guido with a bunch of genial menace. Lana and Vicky float the idea of turning Joel's home into a brothel until his parents return, with Joel acting as their pimp. Joel is not interested in this exciting new career path. Joel, Lana, Vicky, and Barry get baked and eat ice cream by the shores of Lake Michigan. Joel asks Lana prying questions about her childhood, and she angrily storms off. When she retrieves her purse from the front seat of the Porsche, she accidentally releases the parking brake, and despite Joel's valiant attempts to save it, the Porsche rolls into Lake Michigan. Joel misses his midterms while getting his dad's car raised from the deep. When the school nurse refuses to give him a phony excuse for his absences, he grows abusive toward her. He ends up with a well-deserved suspension, thus damaging his chances of getting into Princeton. Distraught, he heads to Lana's new apartment. She comforts him, and they agree to turn his house into a brothel to raise money to repair the Porsche. So Lana sends a bunch of her fellow sex workers over to Joel's home, where they're greeted by a very happy Barry. One of the sex workers is played by future Will and Grace star Megan Mullally. Joel heads out to recruit brothel clients, i.e. horny high school boys. Joel has spent the film thus far dressed like a quintessential 1983 teen preppy in Oxford shirts and crewneck sweaters, but in honor of his new career path, he changes up his image. He pairs a sport coat with jeans and a t-shirt, and tops it all off with a pair of Ray-Ban Wayfarers, and he finally begins to look and act like the version of Tom Cruise we all associate with Risky Business, a smooth-talking salesman who treads the line between sleazy and cool. This became an iconic look, replicated by thousands of Gen Xers. Risky Business isn't entirely responsible for the enduring popularity of Wayfarers, which were created in 1950 by eye care giant Bausch & Lomb, and which were worn by such luminaries as Andy Warhol, Bob Dylan, Marilyn Monroe, and Cary Grant. But after the release of Risky Business in 1983, sales of Wayfarers skyrocketed from 18,000 pairs to 360,000 pairs. The brothel is a rousing success, packing in dozens of satisfied clients. Continuing with this film's excellent soundtrack choices, which have thus far included Every Breath You Take by The Police and Hungry Heart by Bruce Springsteen, Swamp by Talking Heads, After the Fall by Journey, and DMSR by Prince all play during this sequence. Joel is shocked shocked by the arrival of Rutherford, a recruiter from Princeton who wants to interview with him about his application. Rutherford is played by Richard Masur, known at the time for John Carpenter's 1982 remake of The Thing. While various brothel-related activities take place all around them, Joel sits down for an awkward interview with Rutherford. Joel's SAT scores and his GPA are both underwhelming, and it's clear that Rutherford is not impressed with either Joel's credentials or his personality. Lana finds Joel moping after his disastrous interview and cheers him up by suggesting some public sex. So they board the train in the wee hours and ride around endlessly, accompanied by the moody strains of Phil Collins's In the Air Tonight, while waiting for all the other passengers to leave. Once they're finally alone, they make love to Love on a Real Train by electronica pioneers Tangerine Dream. Tangerine Dream composed the Risky Business score, and they were a great choice. Instead of the upbeat pop sound that you'd expect from an 80s teen film, the score is sophisticated and unearthly. Joel picks up his repaired Porsche in the morning and drives home, only to discover his house has been emptied of all furniture and possessions. In a panic, he calls Lana at her apartment, and Guido answers the phone, telling him he'll sell him all of his possessions back in exchange for all the money he made at the brothel. Joel buys back everything, including the Steuben egg, which he narrowly saves from being shattered, and restores his home to normal minutes before his parents return from their trip. Joel's mother goes crazy with ice-cold rage when she notices an almost imperceptible crack inside the Steuben egg. The ire of his parents is tempered when Joel's dad fields a call from Rutherford, who stayed late at the brothel post-interview. Impressed by Joel's business prowess, Rutherford promises to give him his highest possible recommendation for admission to Princeton. The film ends with Joel and Lana going out for dinner at a nice restaurant. Joel wonders if Lana had sex with him on the train to lure him away from the house so that Guido could ransack it, and Lana denies it unconvincingly. They go for a walk in a park. Lana raises the possibility of continuing to see each other, and Joel jokes that it will cost her. That ending scene in the park wasn't in the director's original cut of the film. Brickman's cut ended with a longer scene at the restaurant in which Lana feels suddenly insecure at the realization that Joel will be going off to Princeton, whereas she is doomed to a life stuck with Guido. Joel encourages her to sit on his lap in the restaurant, and he comforts her like a child, and we see that the roles have reversed from earlier in the film. It's a cold and cynical ending, and the studio forced Brickman to add the scene in the park to soften it. The original ending is much truer to the point Risky Business was trying to make, which is that by running the brothel and making thousands of dollars in one night, Joel loses his soul and becomes a colder and more cynical person than he was at the beginning of the film. While it's often very funny, Risky Business is a cold, hard film that is intended as a cautionary tale about the dangers of capitalism, materialism, and greed. By and large, Gen X audiences missed that point entirely. Risky Business is widely regarded as a celebration of capitalism. Joel makes a bunch of money and gets into Princeton and probably ends up with a smoking hot girlfriend as well. The parts we remember most about Risky Business are the funny moments, with Tom Cruise dancing in his underwear or the Porsche sinking into Lake Michigan, or the cool moments like Lana and Joel making love on the train, or Joel donning his Ray-Ban sunglasses and telling the Princeton recruiter, sometimes you just gotta say, what the f***? But look at what Risky Business is really trying to tell us. Lana almost certainly betrays Joel by luring him out of the house with the promise of sex so that Guido can ransack his home. Joel only gets into Princeton because his recruiter apparently gets laid at Joel's pop-up brothel. This is really cynical, and while history shows us that wealthy white guys tend to fail upwards, it's hard to think any of this will do Joel any good in the long run. It rings absolutely true that Joel would feel so pressured to get into a good school. Watching Risky Business again for this analysis instantly transported me back 30 years to my own senior year of high school with SAT tests and AP classes and trying to have the right mix of extracurriculars to look good on a college application, and how my entire future happiness seemed to hinge upon getting the right acceptance letter. But with his neuroses and anxieties and the way he spirals out of control throughout the film, Joel doesn't need Princeton. He needs a gap year spent somewhere far away from his parents so he can figure out who he is. It's an odd film. It has the outer trappings of an 80s teen flick with a hit soundtrack and a story that involves wild parties, wrecked cars, and exposed boobs. There's a tendency to regard it as a lighthearted coming-of-age romp with a veneer of critical respectability like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or 16 Candles. But there's a sophistication and a cynicism to it that you don't generally find in the teen films of this era. Factor in an intelligent script and strong performances across the board, and there ends up being more to Risky Business than the surface would indicate. Next time, we are going to jettison all of this sophistication and cynicism and just go hang out with a bunch of solar babies, which gives Tough Turf a run for its money as the worst title for a pretty rip-roaring teen flick. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you then.